exactly what they like, but they are influential in shaping policy. It's partly in the interest of the government and in some powerful figures in society to just get rid of them.
Is it your sense, you mentioned the Russian Orthodox Church, to which Putin is quite closely aligned, is it your sense that the persecution of the Jehovah's Witnesses is, in some senses, a kind of quid pro quo in terms of the support that that church brings to Putin?
I don't think Putin offers anyone a quid pro quo. It just happens to be that in this instance, perhaps the interests of the state, as Putin, might see them, and the interests of the Russian Orthodox Church might actually coincide. We have the first jail term on a Jehovah's Witness, Dennis Christensen, who happens to be Danish. He's married to a Russian citizen, a resident of Russia. He was sentenced to 6 years. The state is going to an awful lot of trouble to bang them up.
The Jehovah's Witnesses were persecuted during the Soviet era also. What is it that's specific about the impetus that led to the picture that you're outlining now?
I think it's partly a residue of the Soviet era persecutions of them. It lingers in officials' minds, oh, these are a dangerous, dodgy group that we need to do everything to suppress.
Felix Corley, editor of Forum 18 News Service. You're listening to NewsHour.
Distribution of the BBC NewsHour in the U.S. is supported by certified financial planner professionals, trained in providing holistic financial planning with the client's best interest in short and long-term goals from managing debt to saving for college to retirement. Let's make a plan.org. And by Babbel, a European-made language learning program. Babbel teaches practical conversation in Italian, Russian, Swedish, and other languages, available in the App Store or online at babbel.com.
You're listening to WHYY. Supporting WHYY, The Barns. After seeing a photograph for the first time, French painter Paul Delaroche explained, "From today, painting is dead." Now on view, From Today, Painting is Dead, Early Photography in Britain and France, spotlighting 60 innovators of early photography, from landscapes and daguerreotype to portraits and early war photos. Nearly 250 iconic mid-19th century pictures are on view. Tickets at barnesfoundation.org.
Supporting WHYY, Intervention Associates, a subsidiary of Friends Life Care Partners, providing professional private pay care management, guardianship, and healthcare power of attorney services, including care management, comprehensive assessments, advocacy, and long-term care planning. Intervention Associates serves clients of all ages and those with physical and/or mental disabilities. To schedule a consultation, 610-254-9001 or interventionassociates.org.
BBC News with David Austin. The Pope says the Vatican will open its archives on Pius XII, who led the Roman Catholic Church during the Holocaust. But Pius's record has been a matter of controversy, and critics have accused him of appeasing Nazi Germany. China has accused the 2 Canadians it's detained of spying and says it will take them to court. The men were seized after Canada arrested a senior executive of the Huawei telecoms giant at the request of the United States. The prize-winning Egyptian photojournalist says he's been freed from jail after 6 years. Mahmoud Abu Zaid, or Shawkan, is accused of involvement in a Muslim Brotherhood protest, but he says he was only covering the sit-in. Activists in eastern Syria say 150 more IS fighters have surrendered during the latest pause in the fighting around the village of Baghouz. The US-backed Kurdish fighters leading the offensive against the last IS stronghold say about 250 civilians have also handed themselves over. Anti-government demonstrators are expected to take to the streets of the Venezuelan capital Caracas shortly. The protests were called by the opposition leader Juan Guaido, who says he's returning to the country in defiance of an arrest warrant. Rescue operations have resumed in the U.S. state of Alabama, where at least 23 people have been killed by tornadoes. There are concerns that the number could rise in the coming hours. Keith Flint, the lead singer of The Prodigy, has died at the age of 49. With his spiked hair and powerful raw vocals, Flint was one of the most memorable musicians of the 90s. The British Museum says it'll return to Ethiopia a relic of one of the country's former rulers. The lock of hair belonged to Emperor Tewodros II, who fought the British in the 19th century. It's been in Britain for more than 150 years. Those are the latest stories from BBC News.
Central Africa now, and the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is battling the worst outbreak of Ebola in its history. At least 500 people have died and more than 800 have been infected. The BBC senior Africa correspondent Anne Soy reports.
As we enter the hospital gate in Beni, the soles of our shoes are sprayed with a disinfectant and we wash our hands in chlorine water. Nobody shakes hands here anymore. Ebola is spread through infected bodily fluids. In one corner of the hospital compound, tents have been set up. This is the Ebola Treatment Center, run by an organization called Alima. I've come here to meet one of the doctors.
I was working in Mangina where this outbreak started.
Maurice Mutunga was among the first doctors to treat Ebola patients even before the outbreak was known.
After a week, I started feeling unwell. I had a headache, fever. After 2 days, I started vomiting and having diarrhea. Even at that point, I didn't know what I was suffering from. Not even my colleagues who were treating me suspected Ebola. When my condition deteriorated, I was moved to this big hospital in Beni. It was here that I tested positive.
This has been a major test for the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's dealt with 9 previous outbreaks, mostly in remote villages in the west where they were easily contained. In a country as big as Western Europe, but with poor infrastructure, few knew about Ebola in the east, and the ignorance at the beginning of the outbreak only fueled infections. But a lot has changed over the last 6 months. A short distance away, 19-year-old Rahel Masika is lulling a baby to her back to sleep. She is dressed in a sky blue gown and gloves. 2 rows of orange mesh separate me from Rochelle. The baby she's carrying has symptoms of Ebola. Samples of his body have been taken for testing. But Rochelle is not at risk. She is one of more than 250 survivors in this outbreak who are now thought to be immune. But she is lucky to be alive. 10 other members of her family died.
We opened the body bag and performed rituals on my mother's body. The medics warned us against it. They said she had died from Ebola, but we refused to believe them. We told them she died from food poisoning. Then they tried to persuade us to get vaccinated, but we refused and fled to Butembo.
Butembo later became a hotspot of infection. As she traveled back to Beni, Rochelle fell ill.
My brother convinced me to go to hospital. He said we had already lost too many people. Finally, I agreed because I was very weak. I had been vomiting and my veins were collapsing, but they took good care of me at the hospital until I recovered.
Rochelle now believes Ebola exists and she's doing all she can to help.
Anne Soy reporting from the DRC. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC. I'm Razia Iqbal. To Algeria now, and the President, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, has promised to call an early election and not stand again if he is re-elected next month. He's 82, has rarely been seen in public since suffering a stroke in 2013, and his election papers were submitted by his campaign manager on behalf of the president, who is undergoing medical treatment in Switzerland. His decision to seek a 5th term in office sparked nationwide protests. One of those involved is a young student called Rania. We're not using her full name because she has concerns about her safety. So, is the president's announcement enough to appease her?
We don't want him to stay and amend and reform. We don't want him to run because we don't feel like he is even able to do that. The man has been ill since 2013. He's unable to walk or talk or even communicate with us in person. Yesterday, his candidacy file went to the Constitutional Council, not even in person. He had to send somebody else. So why can we trust someone like that to keep his promise and reform or do anything?
When you say why can we trust somebody like that, what does it suggest to you might be happening behind the scenes?
Definitely, a lot of things are happening behind the scenes, and Bouteflika has nothing to do with that. As I said, he's gravely ill. So there's a bunch of puppeteers backstage, and we don't know who are these people. Rumors have it that his brother is in control, the prime minister, some businessmen in Algeria, but we don't clearly know because there's no transparency in our government. So we want all of these people to be gone. We want everything to change, and certainly not a fifth mandate.
The protests that have been taking place so far have been peaceful. Is there any indication from what you are seeing, observing, that might shift because you're not hearing what you'd like to hear?
The slogan for the protest was Silmiya, Silmiya, which is Arabic for peaceful, peaceful. Every time the people took to the streets, this was the message: we don't want another Syria, and we don't want another Algeria in the 90s, because we had some instability and there was some terrorism, and we do not want to repeat that scenario.
Indeed, it was Bouteflika who brought that to an end when he took power.
Indeed, and we are very grateful for that, and we feel like Bouteflika is someone who has a legacy, and we want to preserve that. We don't want him to keep ruling if he's unable to do that.
How would you then assess the mood amongst the protesters and whatever leadership exists amongst the protesters? That you have momentum behind you, or that you are somehow wary that you're losing that?
We are not worried that we are losing that. Of course, the students today went to a strike. All of the universities in Algeria are pretty much empty. Nobody went to school. However, there isn't a general strike, which was the plan all along, that if he were to announce his candidacy, that we will go into a strike. But not everything is clear, because there is some plot twists that keep coming up in our way. So it's very hard for us to be organized. And as you said, there is no leadership. This is just the people going along.
Rania, it's quite rare for protests to emerge in Algeria. It's not a common occurrence. Is there anxiety amongst the protesters that those protests and demonstrations will be put down in some way?
Absolutely. Believe me, my mother was a teenager in the 90s, and she witnessed horrors of terrorism, and she keeps having anxiety attacks because she is scared that that will reoccur. But we cannot let the intimidation of the scenarios of the past or of Syria shut us up and let us accept this humiliation of being run by a man in a wheelchair. We are very well aware that things can go south, but we are doing our best to not have that happen.
That was Rania, a student in the Algerian capital, Algiers. Now, for many in the international community, the reputation of Myanmar's Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, she won the Peace Prize in 1991, is profoundly damaged by her refusal to condemn the mass murder of the Rohingya Muslims by the still powerful Burmese army. But within the country itself, she remains hugely popular, and few Burmese publicly challenge her. However, a new generation of democracy activists is beginning to speak out. As part of the BBC's Crossing Divide season, our Myanmar correspondent Nick Beak brought together one such young activist and a staunch Suu Kyi supporter who refuses to lose faith.
If you stroll through the hectic streets of Myanmar's main city, Yangon, and mention Aung San Suu Kyi, chances are this is still the kind of reaction you'll get.
When I hear her name, I think about the love, respect and resilience.
But now, after the Rohingya crisis, the numerous arrests of peaceful protesters, and the jailing of 2 Reuters journalists, a new voice is emerging in Suu Kyi's Myanmar.
Many people in Myanmar still believe she can save the country, but for me, I think she's not my hero anymore. This is Disaster Lady. I am a youth advocate and activist based in Yangon.
My name is Sid Mo, and I'm now studying social science at university.
5 decades of military dictatorship suffocated public debate in Myanmar. But when we brought together these 2 27-year-olds to consider the chorus of international condemnation heaped on their leader, there was no holding back.
She doesn't have to explain herself. She is not a racist. She is the leader of the country. She doesn't have a power over the military. Everybody knows that.
This is so clear. Crime against humanity, genocide is happening. We have to stand up and say this is not right. And I know that in the interview I'm saying this, I will get a lot of criticism, a lot of blame from Myanmar people. But I feel I'm responsible because future generation will blame us. What were you doing? 1 million or 1 million people were fleeing out of the country. That will be our history.
She's saying to you, Sitmore, effectively, as a Burmese citizen, it's your duty to speak out against Aung San Suu Kyi because she's failed to act in the human rights interest of the Rohingya people.
The core of this statement is not true. So I don't believe Aung San Suu Kyi violated the human rights of this and that people. I don't believe it.
Of course she didn't. She didn't go and kill them.
Of course, and then she didn't order. She didn't order, and she didn't do anything. And
that's something wrong.
Wait, let me finish. Yeah. Let me finish. If you talk about this black and white, good and evil, us versus them, all of these discourse mask the real complexity, and then you are not going anywhere.
The international media, freedom of the press in lots of countries, was really vital for Aung San Suu Kyi as she fought for democracy and when she was under house arrest. So many people find it very odd that now journalism and democracy activists seem to be under attack in her country. Would you criticize her for that?
I think in the transition towards democracy, there are sometimes you move forward, there are sometimes you move a little bit backward, and this kind of situation is quite usual, and not just in Burma.
I feel like we have very limited freedom of expression in Myanmar. We have still sound that is so limited that we can't freely think, we can't freely express ourselves. Even on social media, you can be jailed, you can be arrested.
Do you think that the country Myanmar has a bright future under the leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi?
No, the bright future is already gone.
Without making sure your present is okay, there is not going to be a future. And I think we can just make the future exist.
Have you enjoyed this? Has it been quite interesting chatting about it?
Yeah.
We have hesitation to openly talk to each other, and we have to break that kind of silence. At the end of the day, even if you have a very good question, you have to independent
television documentary about Michael Jackson is causing a storm of interesting issues about the artist and his output and whether we can or should still listen to his songs. The documentary will be aired over 2 evenings but has already been seen in the US and at film festivals. It focuses on 2 men who allege that when they were children, Michael Jackson sexually molested them for decades. I've been speaking to Jonathan Dean, who is a senior writer for the Sunday Times newspaper in London, and he's seen the film.
Leaving Neverland is not a flashy documentary at all. You get a lot of documentaries of the last decade or so which are kind of like do lots of things with narrative that almost make them feel like feature films. This isn't that. It's basically a very, very serious testimony made by 2 men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck. Essentially, it's those 2 men sitting in front of camera individually, going through in very graphic detail what Michael Jackson did to them over the course of several years.
And what have his estate, his family said in response to the allegations that are being made in the documentary?
His estate and family call it lies, and his fans, a particular subset of his fans, also obviously call it lies as well.
You mentioned the response from the fans. Many people did take to social media and use the hashtag MJInnocent. What was your response to it in the context of Michael Jackson, the artist? Is this something that has changed your view of you being willing to listen to his music or you being a fan?
Absolutely, and I think it's very hard to watch and not change your view of what happened. And for me, the listening thing isn't even some great moral stance of kind of I can't separate art from the artist. It's more that the graphic sexual detail of what happened between Michael Jackson and these prepubescent boys is so strong in the film, and it's very, very difficult not to believe it, that I don't want to listen to his music and then think about those images. That for me is one of the main reasons why I can't listen to his music anymore.
When you say that there isn't a kind of grand moral statement that you're making here, it is rooted in a moral judgment though, isn't it? If you are deciding that the work of a person is not something that you can engage with based on how they have behaved in their private life.
I suppose that, yeah, I think music has a reflex as well. It's something where you really conjure up images, and I suppose that is moral to an extent. But on the morality subject, fine, I'm happy to say that morality-wise, I don't think I can listen to him, and I'm surprised that people will be able to listen to him. I mean, Michael Jackson, I think, is harder to use the term that everyone uses now, cancel, because you're cancelling so much of people's lives. It's harder because people are frankly more passionate about Michael Jackson. I think it's a strange decision to listen to his music.
A strange decision to listen to his music. That's quite a strong thing to say in the context of the fact that this was an artist who started when he was a child himself. For many people, this is somebody who they have followed, and it's the kind of soundtrack of generations, not just one generation, but generations of people. And I wonder to what extent it is even possible to argue that all of that can be cancelled. The innocence of listening to music can be cancelled by making a judgment about the behaviour of somebody outside of what music they make.
To be honest, I don't know if this will make much difference to the legacy of Michael Jackson. There's a great sense that people won't agree with me and they just will carry on listening to Michael Jackson like nothing happened. But it's the weight of allegations and what happened to these families who he essentially groomed in order to get access to their young boys. And I think kind of that's when it starts to become quite hard. There are some things which I think make it impossible to still enjoy pop music, because pop music's fun. I was even watching a film the other day, a kid's film, and they start to have Man in the Mirror on, and you go, okay, fine. Like 2 years ago, even though everyone kind of assumed that he was a bit strange, that's like, okay, fine, yeah, we can enjoy that. In the context, once you watch the film of what happened between him and prepubescent boys, it's very strange to enjoy Michael Jackson's music in any light, entertaining way now.